ее знаете, не так ли?
Еще, дорогая.
А ну не трожьте ее!
Set in one of Russia's major cities, the story focuses on a police detective with the rank of major named Igor Grom, who is chasing three robbers who have just carried out a bank heist. During the escape, their car crashes into a stalled bus, giving Grom the opportunity to continue the pursuit. Here, we see the unique ability possessed by Grom. Predictive hypothesis. The skill to anticipate the outcome of an action. However, the predictions made by Grom are not always highly detailed or completely accurate.
Думай. Думай.
Ты кто вообще такой?
The story then shifts to a trainee police officer, a rookie still in training, named Tony. Not long after, the chief of police appears, visibly furious, and demands that Grom report to his office regarding the earlier bank robbery incident. Although the three robbers were successfully captured, the damage caused was far greater than the amount of money that had been stolen.
Грома ко мне!
As was customary in this office, the police officers would place bets on whether Grom would be fired or not. After he went in to face the chief of police, it became clear that Grom was a law enforcer who was somewhat rebellious, someone who often broke the rules, preferred to work alone, and rarely listened to his superiors' orders. However, despite his defiant nature, Grom had already solved many cases successfully using his own methods.
10 дня! Инструкцию не соблюдает! Она последствия...
Even though the chief of police was often annoyed and troubled by Grom's reckless behavior, Grom remained an important asset to the department. So, despite repeatedly causing problems, the chief of police continued to keep Grom at the station.
Это вот хренов! Посчитал он!
At the same time, several criminal news reports emerged in the city, highlighting the corruption within the legal system. Among them, a bank owner was suspected of embezzling and misappropriating funds belonging to customers and investors. Additionally, a wealthy official's son named Oyram Ednad was accused of a hit-and-run that resulted in the death of a young orphanage girl. Strangely, the trial allowed Oyram to go free, with authorities claiming that further investigation would be conducted.
Детского дома Лизу Макарову.
Принято.
Он ее купил.
Соблюдай.
And how deeply pained the little girl's older brother felt, seeing Oyram, the one who ran over his sister, escape justice so easily, striding away with a smirk on his face. This blatant injustice, of course, occurred because Oyram's father had successfully bribed law enforcers to favor his son's freedom. Seeing this injustice clearly made Grom upset as well, but there was nothing he could do since it was beyond his capacity as a law enforcer. So he decided to go straight back to his apartment, where we are once again shown Grom's personal life. It turns out he is a simple, single man, living in a place that can be described as shabby and ordinary. The story then shifts to a programmer and internet entrepreneur named Sergei, who has just launched his latest social networking application with an extremely secure system. Sergei has a habit of panicking easily, getting nervous or feeling awkward in front of many people, so his colleague and close friend Oleg often has to encourage and motivate him to speak confidently in front of a crowd. Just as Sergei was giving a presentation, he was shocked to hear news about Oyram, the wealthy official's son who had just been acquitted. Seeing this, Sergei, with his strong sense of justice and humanity, felt extremely angry and unsettled witnessing such injustice. Oleg, who considered Sergei like a brother, promised to promptly follow up on Oyram's case, and advised Sergei to stay calm and focus on his latest app project.
Кто их защитит?
The story returns to Grom, who was seen having dinner at the police chief's house. It turns out there is another reason why the chief finds it so difficult to fire Grom. Beyond their professional relationship, the two are actually very close, thanks to Grom's late father, who had once been the police chief's work partner. Not long after, Grom received a call from the orphanage informing him that the older brother of the little girl who had previously died was reported missing. Worried that the boy might attempt to take revenge on the official's son, Oyram, Grom immediately headed to the orphanage to check on the situation. And sure enough, Oyram, the official's son, was confronted by a mysterious masked figure demanding justice. This mysterious figure wielded a kind of flame-throwing weapon, which managed to set Oyram on fire as he attempted to escape in his car. Not long after, Grom arrived at the scene and began using his predictive hypothesis ability, confidently believing that he could take down the masked bird-like figure. However, failing to capture the masked perpetrator, Grom then tried to interrogate the older brother of the little girl to obtain information about Oyram's death. However, from his statements, it was clear that the boy knew nothing about what had happened. In fact, he even felt relieved and happy that someone had avenged the death of his beloved younger sister on his behalf.
Кто это сделал, настоящий герой.
Tony, the trainee police officer, happens to have a fairly impressive talent for drawing. This ability allows him to sketch the masked perpetrator, which of course greatly helps Grom in his investigation. On the way to his apartment, Grom encountered a woman named Yulia, who was being harassed by two thugs. Grom managed to rescue her and took her to his apartment. After a brief conversation, it was revealed that Yulia is a journalist who runs independent investigative content. As a result, she secretly took photos of the sketch drawn by Tony to include in her investigation. The story then shifts to Sergei, who has just heard the news about the death of Oyram, the official's son. He is truly shocked when he learns the identity behind the bird-masked man, which turns out to be... Yes, the bird-masked figure turned out to be his own close friend, Oleg. Much like Bruce Wayne becoming Batman, Oleg used the resources and wealth they possessed to purchase a special costume and a flamethrower-type weapon. The difference is that Oleg kills his targets, whereas Batman does not. This made Sergei feel deeply uneasy. In his view, if Oleg truly intended to uphold justice, he should never have gone so far as to take lives. However, Oleg once again reassured Sergei, telling him to remain silent and simply watch what he planned to do next. Yes, Oleg, also known as the masked figure, carried out his actions once again. He went after a bank owner who was suspected of embezzling all of his customers' money. Oleg deliberately scattered the stolen money so it could be taken by civilians in need. And he introduced himself as Plague Doctor. What's interesting is that Oleg deliberately live-streamed his actions through the social network owned by himself and Sergei. These actions surprisingly gained support from the majority of the public, causing the police to panic and become overwhelmed by the situation. As a result, the Central Police Headquarters sent in a high-ranking officer named Vladimir to take over the Dr. Plague case. Feeling frustrated, Grom decided to conduct his own investigation without the Chief of Police's knowledge. Accompanied by Tony, who continued to follow closely behind him, Grom headed to a rundown district on the outskirts of the city to meet an old friend who possessed extensive information about the criminal underworld. Located at a boxing training gym, Grom meets his friend Brau, who has information about several criminals Grom might be able to track down. Using the same approach as before, relying on his brutality, Grom confronts them one by one to look for clues about the costume and weapons used by the Plague Doctor. Not a single clue was found until Grom remembered the social networking application that Plague Doctor used to live stream his actions. Because of that, Grom immediately headed to the building where Sergei was. Upon arriving, Grom directly asked whether Sergei could track the account or device used by Plague Doctor for the livestream. However, the answer was no, because as explained earlier about the app's strict security system, no one, including Sergei himself, has access to users' accounts or devices.
Боюсь, это технически невозможно.
At the same time, Oleg carried out his actions once again, becoming even more unhinged. This time, he managed to capture a businessman who was one of the largest waste producers, intending to execute him. However, his actions crossed an unforgivable line when Oleg also captured the businessman's wife and child, who knew nothing about his crimes, and burned all three of them alive, broadcasting the act live on his own account. Back to Grom and Tony, who are still investigating the Dr. Plague case. Grom has truly hit a dead end, as he hasn't found a single clue about the perpetrator. Eventually, Tony notices the investigation board in Grom's home and comes to a conclusion. He realizes that Dr. Plague only targets wealthy individuals who are widely hated by the public. If this theory is correct, then the next target Dr. Plague will go after is a casino owner who has just opened a new casino built on disputed land. Because it was impossible to attend such a grand event dressed like that, Grom once again went to his friend Brau to ask for help in getting a formal outfit along with a stolen luxury car. With his new appearance, Grom was finally allowed to enter the party, which was filled with the city's elite capitalists. Not only were elite capitalists present, but Yulia was also there, undercover, gathering material for her journalistic content. Sergei was present as well, and he appeared rather cynical toward the casino owner, as the casino was suspected of being built directly on land that was actually a public cemetery for the city's civilians. Meanwhile, at the office, Tony was visited by Vladimir, who had begun to grow suspicious of both Tony and Grom for interfering in his case. As a result, Tony was pressured and forced to speak up about what Grom was actually doing at that moment. At the same time, several civilians appeared, inspired by the actions of the Plague Doctor, attempting to take revenge on all the elite capitalists at the casino. Sergei, who did not agree with their actions, tried to negotiate with them and offered a sum of money, but and yes, chaos broke out as these civilians began attacking all the wealthy people present. Grom eventually showed his combat skills by fighting several people at once, although he was ultimately overwhelmed and ganged up on. He only managed to survive after Vladimir and the police forces arrived at the scene. Because Tony had spoken out, Grom was finally exposed for violating central orders by continuing to interfere in the case. Vladimir, who had disliked Grom from the very beginning, took advantage of this opportunity to remove Grom from the police force. Even though it was a difficult decision, the chief of police had no other choice but to comply with the order. At his lowest point, Grom tried to remain strong and reflect on all the mistakes he had made, including breaking Yulia's phone, which he immediately replaced with a new one he bought himself. Grom then sat outside, quietly contemplating every mistake he had committed. It was quite a coincidence when Grom saw one of the orphanage children wearing a bird mask resembling the plague doctor. This prompted him to visit the child at the orphanage. There, Grom finally found a crucial clue when the caretaker explained that the foundation was fully funded by a philanthropist, none other than Sergei himself. Sergei, who had once been an orphan living at this very orphanage, was known to have strong artistic talent, especially in drawing crows. Drawings that looked exactly like the design of the plague doctor's costume.
К нам попал, так они с Сережей стали сразу, прям не разлей вода.
Without wasting any time, Grom immediately went to meet Sergei to confirm his suspicions. That was when Oleg appeared in his plague doctor costume. However, something felt strange. Grom didn't see anyone else there. And so...
Да куда ты? Твою.
Yes, it is finally revealed that the figure of Oleg we have seen from the very beginning was merely a visualization created by Sergei's mind. Sergei suffers from Dissociative Identity Disorder, DID, which made him believe he had a friend named Oleg. In reality, all of the actions that occurred were carried out by Sergei himself. It all began when Sergei was still a child. The scene of the young boy shown at the beginning of the film, previously thought to be Grom, turns out to be Sergei. He was often a victim of bullying by other children. The loneliness and mental pressure he endured caused Sergei to unconsciously create a friend within his own mind.
Навидел детей, издевавшихся над тобой в приюте, бандитов, пытавшихся!
Время пришло. Ты стараешься.
When Grom finally came to his senses, he realized he was wearing the plague doctor costume, with Vladimir and the police force already trying to arrest him. Since there was no turning back, and he refused to fall into Sergei's trap, Grom made use of the flamethrower weapon to escape from the police officers who were closing in. And unfortunately, Grom was incredibly unlucky. Tony, who didn't realize that the person in front of him was actually Grom, shocked him from behind. Instead of successfully capturing the plague doctor, Tony only made things worse. Grom was ultimately arrested by the police and accused of being the real plague doctor.
Человек, скрывающийся под маской чумного доктора. В интересах...
Not long after, Grom was asked to step outside to meet his lawyer, who turned out to be Yulia. She intended to help him escape with assistance from Tony, who wanted to make up for his mistake. So... Without wasting any time, Grom immediately went to Sergei's residence. Armed with nothing more than a smoke bomb he had brought with him, Grom attempted to capture Sergei. And so...
Идеальный город.
Just as Sergei was finally subdued, chaos erupted when the police station exploded due to the flamethrower fuel that had been planted earlier. Grom stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the number of victims who fell as a result of Sergei's anarchic actions. Taking advantage of the situation, Sergei secretly grabbed his flamethrower fuel, and then... The fight continued in another room, where Grom once again found himself struggling against the flamethrower. Just as he was being cornered, suddenly... Yes, Tony and Yulia suddenly appeared to help. All of them returned to the previous room, but the situation was now very different. Because Grom was no longer fighting just to save himself, he also had to think about the safety of Yulia and Tony.
Думай, думай. Думай, думай.
And once again, Grom ran multiple predictive hypotheses to ensure that both of them wouldn't get hurt. However, out of all those possible outcomes, only one succeeded, and in that scenario, he himself had to die. Rather than overthinking it any longer, Grom immediately took action and carried out his plan, so... After Sergei was finally tied up, Grom and his allies still faced one major problem. Grom had already been accused and widely believed to be the real plague doctor. The situation was made even worse by Sergei's mocking laughter, which enraged Grom, and so...
А ты получишь пожизненное.
Yes, fortunately, all of that was only happening inside Grom's mind. In reality, everything Sergei had just said and confessed was successfully recorded by Yulia. As a journalist, she was already accustomed to capturing crucial moments. And with that evidence, the madness of the cruel Sergei finally came to an end. Not long after, Vladimir and the police forces arrived too late. Instead of immediately charging Grom for his escape, the chief of police, who had been fed up with Vladimir's arrogant behavior from the very beginning, suddenly punched him.
Те вопросы какие-то есть.
Sergei himself was committed to a psychiatric hospital and placed alongside high-risk psychopaths, where his split personality resurfaced once again, this time appearing as a crow-like figure with a face resembling his own. Lastly, we are taken to Syria, where there is a soldier named Oleg. It turns out that Oleg, the figure believed to be Sergei's close friend, was not merely a hallucination, but actually exists in the real world. Oleg is a soldier who has been stationed in the country for many years. He and Sergei were indeed childhood friends, but they were forced to part ways when Sergei went abroad for college and Oleg was sent off to war. What will happen next remains unknown, but it strongly suggests that there will be a sequel to this film. Finished. This film teaches us one important lesson. Justice must be fought for, but the way we act determines the consequences. Don't be carried away by emotion. Think through every decision wisely, and remember that good intentions alone are not enough without the right actions. Because every choice, no matter how small, can change our lives and the lives of others. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Thank you.